We are doing the wrap up for January a little differently right now. We had a flood in the basement. The beautiful pink room is now sopping wet, so I'm going to do my wrap up here. Okay, we're gonna start with my Canadian reads. I drew Ontario, which is our biggest, well, our most populated. I noticed there's a lot of authors that are based in Toronto, and I'm wondering if that's because that's where publishing is, that they all seem to kind of be in that area, or maybe there's like a group of them that hang out. The first person that I read was Tiva Harrison, and I read In Between Days. Now, I started this on New Year's Eve, didn't realize how short it was, and basically finished it that day. Technically, I read it last year, but we're gonna count it because I want to talk about it. This is a beautiful memoir. It is bite-sized. It is easy to take in because it is to the point. It's almost to the point. It's blunt, but it's needed because there are some things that she goes through that are fairly similar in a lot of cancer patients' experiences. I was able to relate to some of the things that she talked about and kind of went, okay, so this is something that everybody is going through. Now, she had a different kind of cancer than my husband does. So there were some things that were different and some experiences that she as a female experienced differently. Didn't change at all the context of the book. It was fabulous, and interspersed between these little bite-sized thought pieces are her comics or graphic drawings, panels, if you were, of her experiences. And they are wild. And I really enjoyed her approach and her wisdoms that she was able to share. This is, I didn't rate it, but if I had to rate it, I would give it like a 5-star easily. It's hard to rate people's lives, but this, not necessarily rating her experience, but rating the way that it was written and presented and her artwork included, this was just beautiful, and I would recommend it. The next Ontario author that I tried was Andrea Alexis, and I started with this book, but the format on my e-library was kind of funny, so I was really struggling to read it. I did like how it started, but I couldn't deal with it. It was like a PDF or something. I ended up going to the next one, which intrigued me because of the cover. This is Pastoral. Now, I started reading this right after watching Wake Up Dead Man. And Wake Up Dead Man is about a murder in a church and focusing on the priest coming to this town. Pastoral is about a priest coming to a town, but my brain was like, oh, when's the murder gonna happen? And it's not that kind of book at all. This is a bit more of a what it's like to be a pastor of a town, but the pastor kind of takes a step back, and we experience the lives of two particular individuals and their sort of goings on in life. And I would say this is a very quiet kind of a piece. It's slow. Think about pastoral paintings that you might see that were really popular in like the 1800s, where it was just a field with a couple of cows. It's kind of that. The only thing that really made this a book that I wasn't into was there was a love triangle where the man was engaged to one woman and he was sleeping with another woman, in his head could think that I'm going to have both of them. And I was so bothered by his entitlement and these women and the way that everything was handled and gone through. And it just was like, and I understand that it's an exploration of like, what would happen if this happened? But I hated it. I absolutely hated it. And I almost put this book down because of that. Because in comparison to this story that just was like, I don't need this story, there was a really cool section where there was a bunch of moths that were performing sort of miraculous type shapes, like they would fly in circles or fly in triangles. And then there were like talking sheep. So like there were these cool magical kind of elements where you're questioning whether or not the pastor has lost his sanity. And then there was this dumb love triangle. I ended up having to like bump this book from like a 4 to a 3 almost immediately. I don't even know who I would recommend this book to. Just take a moment and appreciate this cover and my friend's joke that said, "Paint me like one of your French youths." The next Ontario author that I tried and loved the first chapter but ran out of time was The Wives of Bath. This author lives in Midland, Ontario, which is where my dad grew up. And I might have just picked up her book because of the Midland connection. Immediately got absorbed in her writing. I can't properly review this book because I literally only read one chapter, but I will say in one chapter, she had more sparkle to her writing than the previous book. Venturing off of the Canadian books, I read this one. This is a debut book, and you would have had me fooled that this is a debut. This is called Canticle. Of course I picked it up because it's set in the Middle Ages. It's a woman exploring her faith. All she wants to do is serve God, so she decides to join friars, which is unusual because normally when women want to go into the church, they enter a convent and join a group of nuns, but she decides she wants to be a Franciscan monk. But the monks are kind of like, no, we can't let a woman in here. That kind of like goes against our entire philosophy of chastity, and then you would be a temptation, etc. So we're going to stick you with these women that aren't quite nuns. They are called the Beguines. Have briefly read about the Beguines, but they are a group of women that basically are kind of serving the community. Think like church ladies, but they're not really an associated, like I don't think they are acknowledged by the Pope. She enters this group of women and they're immediately kind of put off by her because they're like, what are you doing? Like, she ran away from this proposed marriage and she's going into the church. They think she's just escaping the marriage. But then she begins to experience some miracles and everyone kind of questions what is going on. Now, I don't like to talk about politics too much, and I'm going to say this in sort of a sideways kind of way. But this is, while fiction is based off of many women's mystical and religious experiences in which their narrative, their story was questioned by the male authority, and the male authority, which we do get a POV from, decides to try and change the narrative through a series of lies to the public, basically just rewriting what her story is. And I'm going to leave it at that because while this is set in the Middle Ages, it is based off of true happenings, and I think this is a good one to reflect on at this time. I'm going to add, if you like any of these, you're going to like this one. And likewise, if you like this one, you're going to like any of these. We're going to continue on with the books that I've read in January. I listened to a childhood favorite. I needed something familiar and wonderful, and that was Into the Land of the Unicorns. I read this first when I was 8 years old and fell in love with the idea of unicorns. This is a surprisingly good reread as an adult. The vocabulary in it is extensive. I'm quite surprised that it is, I would say, aimed maybe for a 10-year-old, but even then, he uses really good vocabulary. The thing I like about the audiobook is that it's full cast and the narrator is Bruce Colville himself. So if you're looking to get into like a fun fantasy series, like first book, super duper short. It's like under 300 pages. But by the time you get to the fourth book, it's like 600 pages and it's really complex and just delightful. I also listened to Forget Me Not, which is a thriller mystery, I guess. And I picked this mainly up because in the description it said the main character decides to work on a farm to try and solve her sister's murder. This ended up being quite a ride. Both loved and hated it at the same time. I enjoyed the main character. She made some really dumb decisions, but usually in a thriller book, that's par for the course. And I kind of liked the setting and the idea of it. The main problem I had was that it was such a small cast of characters, you kind of could figure out most of the twists and most of the ending. That's the only thing not going against it, but I did quite enjoy this one. I saw a number of people say that this one was slow, and that didn't bother me at all. So maybe this was less of like a thriller type of a book and more of a mystery, a slow burn mystery. Anyway, I like this one a whole heck of a lot, so this was like a 4-star read for me. And lastly, I don't know really how to talk about this one. I may have to make a separate video. I read The Abolition of Man. It's both exactly what I expected it to be and more than I expected it to be. It was way brainier than I had expected it, and it was higher philosophical academic C.S. Lewis than I've ever read before. His stuff to me tends to be a bit more accessible, and this one I found to be really difficult to get into, and I feel like a philosophy major might really enjoy this one. I think I'll have to read up on some guides to actually process exactly what was being said. Either that or I've got mummy brain and lack of sleep and it just didn't compute. So this is definitely one that I'm going to have to revisit. It isn't that I didn't understand what was being said, because I have since gone in and listened to a number of other people's explorations of this one, probably because I was picking it up and reading one page at a time and then getting distracted by kids, that it became kind of disjointed for me. So I think this is one that I'm going to have to save and reread later in a more coherent, consistent manner. And that's it. That's what I read in January. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Karen. I read lots of different types of books. We'll see you again soon. Bye.